Hey guys, tonight we're taking a one-way ticket to the least glamorous all-inclusive vacation package history ever offered. Transportation to Australia as a convict. Forget beaches, koalas or Hugh Jackman. Picture yourself sentenced by a judge whose wig is dustier than your favourite old bath towel. Shipped thousands of miles in a boat that makes your first apartment look like a 5-star hotel. And arriving in a new world where the spiders have more rights than you do. Before we paddle out, take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I do here. This one was suggested in the comments, so thank you. I really enjoyed researching it. Drop a comment telling me what you would have been shipped to Australia for. Bad parking, stealing a loaf of bread, or maybe just your questionable taste in music. Now, dim the lights, switch on a fan for that gentle white noise, and get comfy. Maybe double check under your bed for any suspiciously large insect just to set the mood. Let's pause for a moment. Have you ever wondered what exactly did it feel like to have your entire life turned upside down by a stolen handkerchief? Was the boat food actually worse than airline meals? Did anyone ever get used to the smell? How do you keep your dignity when your official government-issued title is prisoner number 1743? And honestly, how long would you last building roads in 100-degree heat, wearing socks made of wishful thinking? Congratulations, you've just woken up in 1798. You're on the docks of Portsmouth. The ship's name is HMS Regret, and your future is somewhere west of worse than you think. Bon voyage. You always knew your sweet tooth would get you in trouble, but somehow you didn't expect it would land you a 10,000-mile vacation. One moment you're eyeing a stale crust in a London market, the next you're explaining to a very unimpressed magistrate why your hunger is now the king's personal problem. Let's set the scene. It's a damp Tuesday morning in 1795, and you're standing in a bustling London marketplace, hands deep in your coat pockets, pretending you're just here for the fresh air. But you and everyone else know exactly what you're really after. The small, sad loaf of bread left out a bit too close to the edge of the baker's stall. The baker's got one eye on his buns, one on his competition, and precisely zero on you, which is just enough opportunity for your growling stomach to try its luck. You casually sidle up, whistling as if you're in a good mood, which is suspicious enough on its own in this part of town. You make your move. The bread disappears into your coat faster than dignity at a middle school dance. Victory for about 30 seconds. Because in true London fashion, there's always someone ready to yell "Stop!" Thief! At top volume, even if all you've stolen is about 3 days' worth of mould. Before you know it, you're pursued by an angry mob, half of whom haven't run this fast since they were your age, and the other half are just hoping something exciting will finally happen in their lives. You don't get far. Nobody ever does. Maybe you trip on a cobblestone, or maybe you just get tackled by a constable who's been waiting all day to use his official voice. Either way, you're marched off to jail with the stale bread now proudly entered into evidence. You're still clutching it as if the judge might let you keep it as a consolation prize. Spoiler, he doesn't. Court is a formality, and not a very fun one. The room smells like a mixture of old books, cheap ink and wet wool. Basically, ode 19th century. You stand in the dock peering up at a magistrate who looks like he was born wearing that wig and will be buried in it too. He sighs, glances at your record, which is refreshingly short unless you count that one time you were accused of loitering with intent to look hungry, and begins the grand ancient ceremony of reading out the charges. There's a little speech about the sanctity of property, the dangers of lawlessness, and something about how, if everyone just helped themselves to bread, England would collapse into chaos, the monarchy would be overthrown, and dogs would start running Parliament. He doesn't look convinced by his own argument, but the audience, because yes, there's always an audience, nods solemnly. This is better than the theatre, and nobody here had to pay for tickets. You're allowed a defence. I was hungry, you say, which in your mind is more than reasonable. But the law isn't about reason. It's about making an example. Bread today, revolution tomorrow. And so the sentence is handed down with a flourish. 7 years transportation beyond the seas. In other words, pack your bags, you're going to Australia. Hope you like spiders and regret. It's surreal. 1 minute you're dreaming about a bite to eat and the next. Your entire life is upended because your stomach couldn't wait for payday. There's no appeal. There's barely time for a last look at London's grey skies before you're shuffled off to the cells, your fate sealed by the world's least satisfying snack, all for a loaf of bread. Not even the good kind, just one more reason to be grateful for modern delivery apps. Welcome to the British justice system, where even your cravings can get you shipped to the edge of the world. Standing in a courtroom, you discover that powdered wigs are even less dignified in person, especially when they're about to sentence you to transportation. No one looks good sobbing next to a barrel-chested bailiff. You'd always imagined courtrooms as grand, orderly places filled with polite coughing and the scent of old leather. In reality, it's a drafty box of echoing footsteps, hushed gossip, and the unmistakable aroma of centuries of damp and disappointment. The pews are packed with neighbours who couldn't resist a free show, and your best friend has found the one creaky spot on the floor to shift on, over and over again. Everyone's craning for a look at the day's entertainment. You, the latest local cautionary tale. You're sandwiched between two other unfortunates, a chimney sweep caught filching silver spoons, and a woman who allegedly insulted a magistrate's hat. The bailiff, built like he moonlights as a circus strongman, places a reassuringly heavy hand on your shoulder, just in case you decide to try the time-honoured tradition of making a run for it. Spoiler, no one makes a run for it. Not in shoes this slippery. You try to keep your dignity, but the judge's wig looks like it was made from the tail of an agitated sheep, and he keeps adjusting it as if it's plotting an escape. The magistrate peers at you over his spectacles with all the warmth of an undercooked potato. The clerk rattles off your name with the same enthusiasm as a man reciting a list of garden weeds. The prosecutor launches into a dramatic retelling of the bread incident, inflating your petty theft into a full-blown threat to the very fabric of British society. If you're to be believed, you were 2 bites away from storming the palace with a fork. Let's pause here to address the elephant in the room. These wigs. Up close, they're less noble justice and more I lost a bet with a sheepdog. White powder clings to eyebrows and drifts lazily to the floor, marking everyone who stands beneath as an official loser in the dignity lottery. You wonder, briefly, if a judge has ever sneezed mid-sentence and sentenced someone to 7 years sneezing fit by mistake. The sentencing itself is less of a moment and more of a process. There's legal jargon, a few dramatic sighs, and a lot of references to the crown, as if you personally insulted the king's pet goldfish. You're instructed to stand, which sounds simple until you realise your legs have gone numb. The bailiff helps you up, possibly to keep you from crumpling to the ground like a fainting goat. The verdict, when it finally arrives, is pronounced with the sort of grand ceremony reserved for coronations or the last slice of cake at a family gathering. Transportation, the judge intones, as if he's gifting you an all-expenses-paid trip to a tropical paradise, rather than an unpaid internship in sunstroke, venomous wildlife, and unrelenting misery. You're not sure whether to curtsy or cry. The judge's wig looks like it's doing both. There's barely a moment for goodbyes. You turn to the gallery and catch your mother's eye. She's dabbing her nose with the same handkerchief you were once accused of pinching. Your siblings look like they're caught between pity and relief that they'll finally get your side of the bed. Even your mate Tom, who once swore he'd bust you out if things got rough, is looking at his shoes, reconsidering his stance on friendship. It's over quickly. You're led away by the bailiff, the heavy courtroom door thudding shut behind you like the world's least satisfying encore. As you shuffle toward the holding cells, the powdered wig brigade gathers up their documents. The gallery begins its post-trial gossip, and you realise this is how it happens. Not with a bang, but with a wig, a sigh, and a very awkward goodbye. Congratulations. You're now officially history's problem. The government says you can pack personal effects, but all you've got is a threadbare shirt, half a comb, and a deep, gnawing sense of dread. Suddenly, you miss the days when your biggest concern was missing sock pairs. Let's start with the practicalities. Personal effects sounds grand, but what it actually means is whatever you can carry that the bailiff doesn't immediately confiscate. Your worldly possessions fit into a ragged cloth bundle, no leather suitcase, no convenient backpack, just the time-honoured tradition of wrapping your entire life in something you hope doesn't have holes in the bottom. If you owned a sturdy box, the box would probably get shipped to Australia instead of you, and honestly, you'd wish it luck. You stare at your choices. Should you bring the shirt with the missing sleeve, or the shirt with the mysterious stains that nobody in your family has ever been able to identify? There's a brief moment where you fantasize about packing for a real holiday. Socks, breeches, a hat that doesn't double as a rainwater collection device. Instead, you settle for your one sad change of undergarments, and whatever sentimental object you can sneak past the jailer, maybe a locket with someone else's initials or a pebble from the riverbank where you once had a good day. Toothbrush? Not invented yet, and if you're lucky you can pinch a frayed twig from the yard as a poor substitute. Shoes? If you're among the fortunate few, you'll bring the pair with the least holes. If not, your feet are about to learn a lot about splinters, and the true meaning of going barefoot. You try not to think about underwear. History is not kind to the underclothed. Let's just say, if you packed an extra pair, you're already above average for the convict class. You are your comb, snapped in half from the time you tried to negotiate a knot out of your hair with brute force and optimism. Is it worth taking? You decide yes. Nothing says adapting to a new world quite like trying to look presentable for the governor with 3 teeth and a hairstyle only a mother could love. There's a surreal quality to the whole process. In theory, packing for a journey should be about anticipation. Instead, it's more like a game show called What's Least Likely to Get Stolen Before You Get There. Your hopes and dreams didn't make the cut. They're staying behind in a small pile on your childhood bed, alongside a ball of twine and a broken button that, for some reason, you feel genuinely sentimental about. You try to bargain with the guards. Can you bring your favourite mug? No. Your dad's old cap? Only if you want it swapped for a sneer and a nudge down the gangplank. Anything that's remotely sharp or useful disappears into the black hole of official storage, which is code for someone else's pocket. You're left with whatever is least appealing to the professional magpies running the show. Some of your fellow prisoners are getting creative. Sally, the pickpocket, has tied her hair ribbons around her ankle, and old Ned is smuggling a deck of battered cards up his sleeve, hoping no one notices. Everyone clings to a scrap of home. Sometimes it's a letter, sometimes it's a cracked wooden spoon, sometimes it's a prayer muttered into a cuff. For most, it's simply the shirt on their back, the hope in their chest, and the constant pressing question of whether anyone remembers to pack enough luck. The irony is sharp. The fewer possessions you have, the easier it is to pack for a lifetime in exile. The all you need is yourself. Philosophy is less inspiring when yourself smells like 3 weeks of worry and has 2 mismatched shoes. As you're herded toward the waiting ship, your bundle feels both light and impossibly heavy. You give one last look back, not just at the city you're leaving, but at the life you're packing away forever. No one's ever ready. Not really. But at least you won't have to worry about missing socks anymore. In Australia, everyone's travelling light. The pre-embarkation lock-up isn't exactly the Ritz. The beds are slabs, the company's questionable, and the only pillow is your own arm. The air smells like boiled socks and bad decisions. You shuffle in with the other soon-to-be exports, and the door slams shut behind you with the finality of a judge's gavel. It's dark. So dark that you can't quite tell if your neighbour is glaring at you or just sleeping with his eyes open, which honestly is a strong possibility here. The walls sweat. The floors sweat. You, regrettably, are also sweating, even though it's cold enough to see your breath. Welcome to the part of history they never show on the travel brochures. Every surface is hard. The bed is nothing more than a shelf, designed to flatten your back and your optimism at the same time. You try to find a soft spot, but the only thing softer than the stone slab is your resolve not to cry. You make a pillow out of your arm, which goes numb almost immediately, but at least it's warmer than the wall. There are blankets, technically, if you define blanket as something that was a sack in a previous life and smells like cabbage. You're grateful, and also slightly horrified. Around you, the jail's population is settling in for the night. There's the guy who mutters to himself, the woman who snores like a walrus with sinus problems, and someone in the far corner determined to carve their name into the stone with a spoon. The only sense of community comes from collectively pretending you don't notice the rats. They're the real old-timers here. They know the routine. Some are bold enough to scamper right up to your toes, giving you a look that says, "First time, huh?" You're pretty sure you saw one with a monocle. If the rats ever unionize, you'd honestly vote for their candidate. Food is a memory now. You got your last meal hours ago, a hunk of bread, and something they swore was soup but tasted like disappointment and old celery. No one complains too loudly, since the guards have a creative approach to customer service, and the only thing worse than being hungry is being hungry with a black eye. The hours crawl by. There's no clock, just the slow, methodical drip of water from a leaky pipe somewhere above. Every once in a while you hear the distant clang of a guard's boots, a cough, or the unmistakable skitter of tiny feet. It's a symphony of misery, performed nightly and always off-key. You stare up at the ceiling, trying not to think about tomorrow, but your mind is like a carnival barker announcing every fear. What will the ship be like? Will I ever come back? Is that stain on the wall moving? Sleep, when it comes, is more like a series of naps rudely interrupted by the cold, the noise, and the pressing realization that you're at the absolute bottom of the pecking order. It's hard to relax when you're clutching your bundle of possessions and hoping nobody decides they like your blanket better than theirs. The only thing that keeps you sane is the quiet, shared camaraderie among the doomed. A muttered joke, a snort of laughter, a whispered story about someone who made it big in the colonies, which you strongly suspect is fiction, but you let yourself believe it anyway. As the first grey light of morning seeps through the bars, you find yourself still awake, exhausted, and strangely resigned. Today is the day you leave everything behind, your city, your past, even the thin mattress you swore you'd never miss. You're about to embark on the world's longest, worst group cruise, and all you can do is take a deep breath, sit up, and try to brush the straw from your hair. Congratulations! You survived your last night in jail, only several hundred nights to go. Your cruise ship is a decommissioned war vessel refitted with chains, cots, and an optimistic rat infestation. No welcome drinks, but you do get a whiff of bilge water and desperation. It's your first glimpse of the hulking blackened ship waiting by the dock, once a proud man of war, now stripped of its glory and repurposed into the world's least desirable Airbnb. You'd hoped, in a naive moment, that transportation might involve a scenic boat ride, maybe a fresh breeze, the gentle lap of water. Instead, you get a wall of stench so powerful it feels like a slap from Neptune himself. The air is thick with the scent of wet rope, rotting timber, and the collective dread of everyone on board. A guard shoves you up the gangplank, your bundle of personal effects, now weighing a few ounces, mostly memories and lint, clutched to your chest. You can't help but notice the plank wobbles, creaking ominously with each step, as if the ship itself is protesting your arrival. The closer you get, the louder the noise becomes. The barking orders of sailors, the shrill caw of seagulls, and the distant, mournful song of some poor soul already resigned to fate. Above it all, the unmistakable chittering of rats, your new neighbours. Inside, the ship is dim and claustrophobic. Light filters down through grates in sickly yellow ribbons, just enough to illuminate the lines of shackles bolted to the deck and the stacked rows of wooden cots that look suspiciously like coffins. You quickly realise the cots were designed by someone who believed comfort is for the weak. They're short, hard, and barely wide enough for a single defeated spirit. If you sleepwalk, congratulations. You'll become intimately acquainted with the deck planks. You're herded below decks, past armed guards who clearly didn't get into law enforcement for the conversation. Everything echoes. Boots on the stairs, muttered curses, the dull clank of metal. The accommodations are tight. You're assigned a cot and a spot on a bench, but personal space is just a fond memory, left behind somewhere back in the holding cell. You share your living quarters with hundreds of other convicts, all packed in with military precision, and the mood of people stuck in a slow-moving blender. As you stake out your bit of territory, you discover that the ship's plumbing is, at best, a theory. The bilge, the lowest, wettest, and most pungent part of the boat, fills with the runoff of hundreds of people. There's a constant battle between the crew and the smell is winning. It rises up from the lower decks, mingling with sweat, salt, and the lingering aroma of boiled cabbage. Even the rats seem offended. The rules of the hulk are simple. Don't argue with the guards, don't make eye contact with the guy muttering in the corner, and don't put your shoes anywhere you can't see them. You're now part of a floating society, with its own unspoken rules, its own alliances, and its own minor daily horrors. There's a bathroom, but you quickly learn that using it is an adventure best undertaken during daylight, when you can at least pretend the dark stains are shadows and not an ever-growing petri dish. Night falls early. The only light is a swinging lantern, casting flickering shadows across anxious faces. Conversation is subdued, punctuated by the occasional cough, whimper, or the high-pitched squeal of a rat claiming squatters' rights. You lie on your cot, pressed shoulder to shoulder with strangers, the creak of the ship echoing in your bones. You listen to the endless lapping of the water and try not to think about the journey ahead, or what's lurking in the dark just beyond your reach. Welcome to the hulk. Sweet dreams are officially cancelled. The aroma hits you before the guard does. Imagine a blend of salt, fear, wet straw, and the sort of body odour that could peel paint. You quickly learn the value of shallow breathing. You take your first real step below deck and realise instantly with every nerve ending that this ship is a monument to lost hope and failing hygiene. The air is so thick you could slice it and serve it with hardtack. At first, you try breathing through your mouth. Bad idea. It tastes the same as it smells, only with the added bonus of discovering just how humid fear can be when it's shared by 300 desperate people in close quarters. You shuffle forward, clutching your meagre bundle of belongings and hoping for a draught of fresh air that never comes. The corridor is alive with the sounds of misery, the hacking coughs of men who haven't seen a doctor in months, the rustle of lice making themselves at home, the slosh of slop buckets making their rounds. Every step deeper into the hull brings another layer of scent. Sweat that's soaked into wood, socks that haven't left feet in weeks, and a mysterious tang of boiled cabbage. You pause momentarily to debate whether cabbage is even on the menu. It doesn't matter. The smell lingers like a bad joke. The guards, men with faces set in stone and noses immune from years of exposure, push you along, barking orders to keep moving. They carry short clubs and longer scowls, but you realise they too are prisoners in their own way. No one escapes the stench. Even the rats, bolder now than ever, seem resigned. You spot one perched on a rafter, washing its face with grim resolve, probably wondering what it did in a past life to deserve this fate. You find your assigned spot, which is both your sleeping quarters and your living space, and for the foreseeable future, your personal hell. The straw mattress is already damp, and your new neighbours are equally enthusiastic about introductions. There's old Mick, who claims he once met the king, no one believes him, and a boy called Sparrow who's already eyeing your shoes with the calculation of a seasoned survivor. Everyone here is marked by the same waxy pallor and haunted eyes. Personal hygiene is not just neglected, it's actively discouraged by circumstance. Water is too precious for washing. You make peace with the grime, because at least it forms a protective layer. Medieval Teflon for the soul. Some prisoners try to freshen up by dabbing themselves with vinegar, but it just adds a new note to the orchestra of odours. You mentally file this under bad decisions, right next to accepting free ale from a stranger. Privacy, you learn, is a relic of your old life. You do everything within arm's reach of others, eating, sleeping, scratching, regretting. Your ears adjust to the background hum of muttered prayers, whispered deals, and the faint sound of someone quietly weeping into their hat. In this place, dignity is the first thing to go, lost somewhere between the overflowing bucket and the permanent cloud of body funk. As night falls, the air somehow grows heavier. The ship rocks on the current, each sway sending a new wave of scent your way. You pull your thin blanket tight, nestling into the straw, and try to imagine fresh air. A breeze on the moors, the scent of rain, your mother's laundry on a line, but it's no use. You're adrift in a sea of sweat, fear, and fermenting socks. Tomorrow you'll get used to it. Or at least you'll stop noticing. That's the real mark of a convict. The moment you realise the smell isn't going anywhere, and neither are you. Welcome to the olfactory adventure of a lifetime. No escape, no refund, and no fresh air in sight. Everyone here is an interesting character. There's Toothless Dave, who's already eyeing your shoes, and a kid called Weasel, who can pick your pocket while making eye contact. Privacy? You remember her fondly. Let's start with Toothless Dave. He's been on more prison hulks than you've had hot meals, and every time you sit down he's somehow already there, giving you the kind of smile that makes you want to check your pulse and your belongings. His gums glisten in the lantern light, and he has a habit of narrating the misfortune of others like a morbid sporting commentator. According to legend, and by legend, I mean Dave himself, he once bit a rat and won. He won't say what the prize was. Then there's Weasel, whose actual name is probably something like Simon, but no one calls him that except his mother, who gave up visiting after the third arrest. Weasel is alarmingly good at two things, picking pockets and looking innocent while doing it. Within 20 minutes of boarding, he's already acquired 3 handkerchiefs, a crust of bread, and a button from your coat, which he'll return with a sly grin, just to keep his skills sharp. It's unsettling, but you're too tired to care. You start keeping your few possessions in your sock, though you're not convinced he couldn't find them there too. Your other bunkmates are a parade of misfits and cautionary tales. There's old Sally, who claims she's only here because she looked at a magistrate the wrong way. She cackles in her sleep and tells fortunes for crumbs. There's Big Tom, the former dock worker with forearms like hams and a laugh that shakes the bunk above you. He becomes your unofficial security system. No one messes with your sleeping space while Tom is around, except for the time he rolled over and accidentally kicked you out of bed. Next to Tom is Candlejack, a wiry fellow who never blinks and swears he can see in the dark. He speaks in riddles and once spent an entire evening staring into the corner, having a conversation with the ghost of his dignity. You give him a wide berth, especially after he offers to swap you a potato for your shadow. Privacy, meanwhile, has gone the way of your clean socks. You dress, eat, and sleep with your knees pressed against someone else's back. Conversations are public events. Arguments are even more so. You quickly develop the ability to tune out the background noise of snores, curses, and the rhythmic thump of someone's head against the hull as they try to dream their way out of this mess. There's a social hierarchy at play, invisible but immediately understood. The old-timers, like Toothless Dave and Old Sally, hold court, swapping stories and trading advice about who to avoid, which guards are soft touches, and how to survive the daily rations without permanent digestive damage. Newcomers stick together for protection, or at least until someone steals their shoes. Some men have already formed alliances, huddling together at night and watching out for one another in the line for food. Others prefer solitude, which is a bold choice in a room where the only solitude comes when someone farts and everyone temporarily vacates the area. Every group needs its peacemaker, and that job seems to fall to Sparrow, the youngest convict on board, who tries to settle disputes with jokes and has a knack for lightening even the darkest mood. Still, it's a world of shifting alliances. One day your neighbour is sharing half a biscuit, the next he's accusing you of stealing his blanket. Trust is a currency in short supply. In time, you learn the most important survival skill. Laugh when you can, sleep when you're able, and never ever trust a man named after an animal. Welcome to your new family, a collection of oddballs, survivors, and walking, talking, cautionary tales. You'll never be alone again, and that's not always a comfort. On your first morning, the ship lurches, your stomach protests, and the deck sways like a bad punchline. The only thing less stable than your footing is your confidence in surviving this journey. You wake to the gentle sound of someone retching into a bucket, and the less gentle sound of Toothless Dave regaling your bunkmates with tales of his iron stomach, as if the smell alone isn't enough to make your soul want to abandon ship. Your dreams of land are quickly replaced by the reality of a floating madhouse, where every surface is damp, every smell is suspicious, and every movement requires the balance of a professional tightrope walker. The sea, as it turns out, is not a gentle companion. One moment the floor is beneath you, the next it's on the ceiling, and somewhere in between you're clinging to your cot like a barnacle with abandonment issues. The ship heaves and groans, its timbers shuddering with every slap of the waves. You lurch upright, the world spinning, and realise the only thing holding you in place is a fellow convict snoring on your shoulder. He mutters something about flying fish and promptly rolls over, taking the blanket with him. Breakfast, such as it is, does little to comfort. You're presented with a bowl of something grey and unidentifiable. Porridge, perhaps, but with all the joy and texture removed. You try to eat, but your stomach flips like it's auditioning for a circus. The trick, some old sailor says, is to keep your eyes on the horizon. This advice would be more helpful if you could actually see the horizon from the stuffy, half-lit underbelly of a convict ship. Instead, you focus on not embarrassing yourself in front of Weasel, who has already bet someone a week's worth of hardtack that you'll be the next to lose your lunch. Around you, the communal misery blossoms. Some people take to the sea like ducks, others like particularly seasick bricks. The experienced hands have their own rituals, chewing on stale bread, sucking on bits of lemon, if they can get them, or just cursing the sea and hoping it takes the hint. Most, though, just clutch their stomachs, groan, and hope for quick oblivion. The sound of retching becomes a strange comfort. At least you know you're not alone. The deck itself is a battlefield. Every step is a negotiation with gravity. You lurch left, the ship lurches right, and suddenly you're engaged in a slow-motion dance with 3 other convicts and a bucket of soapy water. The bucket naturally wins. By mid-morning you've fallen twice, bruised your pride, and developed a newfound respect for anyone who can walk a straight line aboard a moving ship. Toothless Dave claims he can juggle on a rolling deck. He demonstrates. The resulting chaos earns him a stern warning, and you, accidentally, someone else's breakfast on your shoes. As the day drags on, you begin to realise that seasickness isn't just a physical trial, it's mental warfare. The endless rocking, the monotonous slap of waves, The constant creak and groan of timber and the unchanging greyness outside. It's disorienting, claustrophobic, and more than a little depressing. Even the rats look queasy, and you swear one gives you a look of mutual sympathy. By nightfall, your world has shrunk to the size of your cot and the bucket beside it. You lie there, eyes shut, willing the world to stop spinning, or at least slow down enough for your stomach to get off. You make bargains with every god you remember, promising better behaviour if you just wake up on dry land, any land really, as long as it isn't moving. You survive your first day at sea, barely. The ship will lurch again tomorrow, so will you. Welcome to seafaring, convict style, where the only thing less reliable than your stomach is the ship's definition of breakfast. Breakfast is a biscuit hard enough to chip teeth, salt beef that's mostly salt, and a mysterious stew featuring more legs than ingredients you can name. Even the rats turn their noses up at the porridge. The first meal aboard the Hulk is not so much a culinary experience as a dental challenge. You sit with your fellow convicts, staring at a chunk of hardtack, so-called ship's biscuit, that has survived unscathed through storms, decades, and perhaps several previous voyages. Rumour has it some biscuits date back to the previous king. You test this theory with a tentative nibble, only to realise the main ingredient is regret, and the secondary ingredient is surprise weevils. If you're lucky, the weevils are already dead. If you're luckier, there are fewer of them than teeth you lose on the first bite. The salt beef, another staple of your new diet, arrives as a glistening slab of mystery. It's beef, supposedly, though it could also be horse, or perhaps shoe leather preserved since Roman times. You hack at it with your spoon. The salt, so abundant it glitters, serves two purposes: preserving the meat and ensuring you drink half your daily water ration in one sitting. The trick, you learn, is to soak it for an hour before eating. The problem, you learn right after, is there's nowhere to soak it but your own mouth. Porridge rounds out the meal, a grey, viscous concoction that manages to be both too runny and too lumpy, served with all the enthusiasm of a tax collector at the gallows. You brace yourself for the flavour and quickly discover there isn't one. If the ship had flavour, the porridge would have drowned it at sea. It clings to your spoon with a stubbornness you can only admire from a distance. Even the rats, those connoisseurs of the convict world, give it a sniff and shuffle away, seeking higher culinary ground in the slop buckets. Lunch and dinner are no better. On the rare occasion you receive something green, it's only because a weevil went exploring. Stew nights are an adventure. Bowls pass down the line, the contents unidentifiable except for the occasional surprise leg floating near the top. You fish out a lump and give it a suspicious prod. Is it root vegetable? Fish. Something the cook dropped, decided to leave in, and call protein. No one asks because no one really wants to know. A general rule develops. If you can't name it, don't look too closely. Of course, scarcity has a way of making the inedible seem slightly less horrifying. After a week, the weevils are just extra protein, and the salt beef, if boiled long enough, starts to resemble food. Toothless Dave boasts about his ability to eat anything, but even he pauses before the stew. Old Sally claims the secret is to close your eyes and pretend it's pudding. The young ones just trade away what they can't eat for an extra sip of water, or a turn near the porthole where the smell isn't quite so concentrated. Food also becomes currency. Someone with a spare crust or a whole biscuit can barter for favours, protection, or gossip. There are always whispers about hidden rations, about a lucky soul who snuck aboard a wedge of cheese, or a sailor who, for the right bribe, will pass you a bit of real bread. These are the legends that keep spirits alive when supper is a contest of chewing versus surrender. You adapt. Your jaw becomes stronger, your standards lower, and your sense of adventure more desperate. You eat what's put in front of you, because hunger is a stern teacher, and taste is a distant memory. Sometimes, late at night, you dream of real food. Apples, warm pies, fresh bread. You wake up, find another weevil, and remember where you are. Culinary regret? You wear it as a badge. Out here, on the edge of the empire, survival means eating what won't eat you first. Washing isn't encouraged, partly because there's no fresh water, and partly because no one wants to see what's living in your shirt. You develop a personal relationship with lice and start naming your fleas for company. Personal hygiene on a convict ship is less self-care routine and more managed surrender. You'd like to keep clean, you really would. But water is strictly rationed, reserved for drinking or keeping the crew from mutiny. Bathing? That's a rumour. If you ask for a wash, the guard just laughs and points to the nearest bucket, already occupied by someone's lunch from this morning. Even if you had a private ocean of your own, the thought of peeling off your only shirt and unleashing whatever ecosystem has grown underneath is enough to make you reconsider. There are things down there that may predate the voyage itself. The most regular contact with water comes courtesy of the sea spray that sneaks in through the hull's cracks. You get damp, sure, but never truly clean, just slightly saltier than before. After a while you realise your clothes have formed a kind of protective crust so thick it might survive the trip even if you don't. The fabric, once a recognisable colour, now exists in a spectrum between damp mouse and mysterious stain. Changing your clothes isn't a luxury, it's an event, attended by the entire flea community who've built a thriving civilization in your armpit. You're basically hosting an insect version of the Enlightenment down there, and the debates over property rights are getting heated. As the days pass, you get to know your fellow travellers on a very personal level. Fleas, lice, and the occasional mysterious crawler become loyal, if unwelcome, companions. You name them Fergus, Queenie, Old Biter, just for a bit of company during the long scratching nights. They're not much for conversation, but at least they don't snore, complain about the food, or try to trade your blanket for a rotten apple. Some convicts even hold races, flicking their resident bugs along the seams of their shirts to see whose can cross the finish line first. Gambling's forbidden, but everything else is just a form of morale building. Toothless Dave claims the best defense against lice is to outsmell your bunkmates. If you're the worst, the bugs get bored, he says, which is as close as anyone gets to medical advice here. You try to air out your clothes when you can, but space is at a premium, and nobody wants to hang their laundry in a room already at full olfactory capacity. There's no soap to speak of, unless you count the harsh, gritty stuff reserved for the captain's cabin, and you're not about to risk your life over a chunk of lye. So, you adapt. You scratch in rhythm to the ship's rocking. You ignore the rash developing under your collar, and you count yourself lucky if the creatures in your shirt don't start singing sea shanties at midnight. Illness, of course, is never far off. Coughs and fevers ripple through the ship like unwelcome rumours. If someone falls seriously ill, they get a few kind words, a blessing, and are moved closer to the air, partly for their health, mostly so everyone else can breathe a little easier. The surgeon, a man whose hands are permanently stained and whose tools look like leftovers from a blacksmith's fire sale, does what he can, but mostly he just recommends rest and hands out dubious powders that smell suspiciously like sawdust. Somehow, through a combination of stubbornness, camaraderie, and very low expectations, you manage to survive the worst of it. You form alliances with fellow sufferers, sharing remedies passed down from grandmothers, chewing tobacco for toothache, vinegar for sores, prayer for everything else. You stop dreaming of fresh baths and start dreaming of just feeling dry for a single day. You learn that, out here, filth isn't failure, it's survival. You may arrive in Australia smelling like a well-aged cheese, but at least you'll arrive. And honestly, that's good enough. There's nothing like the gentle encouragement of naval discipline. Step out of line, and you're introduced to the cat o' nine tails because nothing says rehabilitation like public flagellation. The rules are simple, mostly because there are only two. Obey, and don't be the reason someone fetches the whip. The cat o' nine tails is not a metaphor, nor is it a cute nickname for a particularly sassy feline. It's a real whip, 9 knotted cords attached to a handle, designed for maximum misery and minimum ambiguity. Rumour has it the knots are sometimes dipped in salt for sanitation, but everyone knows it's for the extra sting. The first time you see it wielded, you realise all those stories about discipline at sea are, if anything, understated. Punishments on board are a public affair. There's no time-out or gentle warning. If you're caught stealing, fighting, or even looking at a guard funny, you're hauled up to the deck in front of the whole miserable audience. The guilty party is tied to a grating or a mast, shirt ripped from their back, and the sentence, 5 lashes, 10, or however many the captain thinks appropriate, delivered with a precision that would make a watchmaker proud. Everyone watches, mostly because they have to, and partly to remind themselves just how badly things can go if you get creative with your opinions. And if you're thinking of being clever and sneaking around at night, let me introduce you to the bilbos. These are heavy iron restraints, like extra miserable handcuffs for your ankles, designed to keep the most restless prisoners right where they are. If you're sentenced to the bilbos, you're shackled in place, sometimes for days. The discomfort is intense. It's impossible to find a comfortable position. Your legs go numb, and your bunkmates take turns whispering their own cautionary tales about the last guy who got stuck in those. Nobody remembers his name, but everyone remembers the smell. Shipboard justice has a creativity born of boredom and a total lack of oversight. Guards invent new ways to keep order, most of which involve yelling threats of extra duty or being assigned the task of cleaning out the slop buckets during the next storm. Nothing makes you rethink your life choices quite like chasing a runaway bucket across a pitching deck, with the wind howling in your ears and a guard shouting directions he's making up as he goes. Sometimes, discipline isn't about physical pain, it's psychological warfare. The guards have a knack for shaming offenders in front of their peers, inventing chores that no one wants, or subjecting you to the silent treatment, which, in the context of a packed hulk, is less about peace and more about making you the unofficial prior until someone else messes up. Every day is a test of patience and nerves. The older prisoners have developed a sixth sense for trouble. You see them stiffen and sit up straight when a guard's footsteps approach. Even Toothless Dave, usually the first to mouth off, knows when to keep his head down and his mouth shut. The trick is to blend in, look busy, and always be a second slower than the loudest guy in the room. Some claim that the discipline is necessary for order. Others see it for what it is, a mix of tradition, cruelty, and the ship's need for control over hundreds of desperate souls. But after the first public flogging, after the first sleepless night spent watching a man suffer in the bilboes, everyone learns the most important lesson of convict life at sea. Don't give the guards a reason. Or if you do, make sure you can run faster than the other guy. Shipboard discipline isn't about making you a better person. It's about keeping the ship from falling into chaos. In a world where the sea itself is unforgiving, the captain and his crew have no intention of being outdone. Welcome to Reform, 18th century style. The sky turns black, the waves rise, and you find religion very quickly. You promise to be good if you ever see land again. Spoiler, you'll break that promise. At first, the signs of a storm are subtle. A stiff wind, an extra chill, a sailor who suddenly stops whistling and starts muttering about ominous portents. The ship's officers start moving faster, tying down anything not already nailed to the deck. You and your fellow convicts look at each other, silently wondering how bad things can get before someone admits they've never actually learned how to swim. Even Toothless Dave, usually full of bravado, clutches the nearest support beam with white knuckles and eyes as big as dinner plates, and then it hits. One moment the sky's merely grey, the next it's midnight at noon. Rain lashes sideways, finding every hole in the deck and soaking everyone regardless of rank or record. The waves rear up and slam against the hull with the force of an angry landlord pounding for rent. The ship groans, shudders, and you find yourself airborne for a fraction of a second before gravity does its job a little too well. Panic sets in faster than a rat on spilled porridge. The guards are no longer worried about keeping order. They're too busy tying themselves to the rigging or shouting orders no one can hear above the roar of the wind. The sailors scramble across the deck, moving with a desperate grace born from years of cheating death at sea. You, meanwhile, are clutching your bunk and mentally composing apologies to every person, deity or houseplant you ever wronged. Even Weasel is saying prayers in 3 languages, just to be sure. The sensation is like being trapped inside a washing machine during an earthquake. Every roll of the ship threatens to spill you onto the floor, or worse, onto Toothless Dave, who's singing hymns, off-key but loud enough to be heard over the storm. Water pours down the stairs in icy sheets, and for a while you wonder if you should just give in and learn to breathe underwater. Every now and then a flash of lightning illuminates the chaos. Terrified faces, wildly swinging lanterns, and the figure of old Sally clinging to her cot and bargaining with St. Jude for just one more sunrise. Someone shouts that this is all your fault for stealing that loaf of bread. You'd argue, but you're busy promising to donate all your future meals to the poor if you survive. The smell, already a horror show, somehow gets worse. Everything is wet, straw, blankets, bread, bodies. Someone's chamber pot tips over, adding insult to injury. The rats, normally confident kings of the underworld, scurry to higher ground, and you strongly consider following them. The ship creaks and snaps in the wind, sounding for all the world like it's about to split in half and deposit you straight into the waiting jaws of the sea. After what feels like a lifetime, but is probably only an hour, the storm eases. The rain slows, the waves fall back, and a tentative light seeps back through the storm shutters. Slowly, the crew regroups and the convicts unpeel themselves from every available surface, limbs shaking and teeth chattering. The captain, looking far less dignified than before, gives a half-hearted speech about the resilience of the British spirit. Everyone pretends to listen, but you're mostly just counting the number of dry patches on your clothes and calculating the odds of surviving the next storm. Later, as you lie in your soggy bunk, the adrenaline fades and exhaustion wins. You make mental notes to be kinder, humbler, and less inclined to gamble with fate. And then you promptly fall asleep, snoring in rhythm with the dripping planks and the collective relief of 300 souls who, for one night at least, remembered how to pray. Of course, by breakfast, you'll be back to complaining about the food and cursing your luck. Old habits die hard, just like stormy nights at sea. Rumours swirl. Tonight's the night. There's always talk of rebellion, but it turns out planning a mutiny is tricky when everyone's too weak to lift a broom, let alone a musket. It starts innocently enough. You're lying in your bunk staring at the ceiling, or what passes for one in a floating dungeon, when someone whispers that the night is ripe for revolution. Toothless Dave is unusually animated, claiming he overheard a sailor say the captain has gone soft. Old Sally, never one to miss an opportunity for mischief, starts humming sea shanties a little too loudly, and even Weasel looks unusually focused, his quick hands twitching in anticipation. By mid-afternoon, the whole lower deck is abuzz with speculation. Some say the rations will be doubled once the guards are thrown overboard. Others insist there's a stash of real bread hidden beneath the captain's bunk. Big Tom, flexing muscles that have not seen real work since the last time someone tried to escape, offers to lead the charge. His plan is simple: overwhelm the guards, take control of the deck and sail straight back to England, as if any of you know how to steer a ship. Someone quietly points out that half the crew is sick with scurvy, and the other half gets seasick climbing stairs. But logic rarely wins when hope is hungry. The mutiny planning meeting is a masterclass in convict democracy. Everyone talks, no one listens, and 3 different people accidentally nominate themselves for leadership. The weapons inventory is bleak. There's a broomstick, a spoon with a sharpish end, and old Sally's lucky potato, which she swears once felled a rat at 20 paces. Weasel volunteers to pickpocket the keys off a sleeping guard, but his skills are currently being used to steal second helpings of gruel. Evening falls and nerves are frayed. Toothless Dave is already celebrating victory, though all he's actually accomplished is terrifying a rat. The guards, meanwhile, seem oblivious, either truly ignorant or simply confident that a mob of starving, seasick prisoners is no real threat. You catch a glimpse of the captain pacing the deck, looking more bored than worried. If he's heard the rumours, he's clearly not losing sleep over them. When darkness finally settles, the air is thick with anticipation. You and your fellow conspirators huddle together, swapping last-minute pep talks and grim predictions. Someone coughs, someone else sneezes, and suddenly it's as if the entire lower deck is falling apart at the seams. Big Tom stands, ready to rally the troops, only to be knocked over by a particularly strong wave. Toothless Dave drops the broomstick, which clatters just loud enough to wake old Grumpy, the oldest, meanest guard on the ship. He glares, yawns, and goes back to sleep, unfazed by the threat of insurrection. As the hour grows late, enthusiasm wanes. The hunger, exhaustion, and constant rocking of the ship sap what little resolve remains. It's hard to foment revolution when you can't keep your eyes open. Old Sally's potato, once a symbol of resistance, is quietly eaten by Sparrow, who confesses he just couldn't help himself. Weasel pockets a spoon for next time. The broomstick is returned to its rightful place, leaning against a wall, holding up dreams of freedom and, more realistically, the ceiling. By midnight, the mutiny fizzles. No one has the energy, the tools, or the stomach for a real fight. Instead, the deck settles back into the familiar routine of grumbling, scratching, and waiting for breakfast. Big Tom promises, "Next time, lads. Next time we'll do it." But even he sounds unconvinced. You drift off to sleep, the excitement of rebellion replaced by the comforting monotony of captivity. If nothing else, you've learned that mutiny, much like everything else on this voyage, is a lot harder than it looks, and that sometimes just getting through the night is the greatest act of defiance there is. When everyone else is unfriendly, you bond with your only reliable shipmates, the rats. They don't judge, they share crumbs, and they never snore. You learn their language, the international squeak of despair. At first, you do what any self-respecting landlubber would do when a rat scurries over your bare toes. You panic, then you pretend you didn't panic, and finally, you swear eternal vengeance on every rodent aboard. But after a few nights, As the initial shock of vermin watching wears off, you come to appreciate the unique companionship of these unofficial passengers. They're always around, always busy, and always seem to know where the best crumbs are hiding. Unlike your fellow convicts, they don't want to steal your shoes or lecture you about mutiny plans gone wrong. Soon enough, you're playing spot the regulars. There's Patch, a chubby fellow with one ear and the heart of an optimist, always first to the fallen biscuit and never discouraged by a kicked boot. Stripe, who's missing half his tail, runs a tight operation under the starboard bunks, while Little Queen is brave enough to nibble a crumb from your fingers if you hold still long enough. You find yourself admiring their resourcefulness. It's a quality you wish you'd had in greater supply back in London, or at least on sentencing day. The roaches, meanwhile, keep to the shadows. They're less companions and more ominous background dancers, skittering across the deck whenever the lantern swings too close. Old Sally claims she's seen one the size of her thumb wrestle a rat for a bit of pork rind. You're not sure you believe her, but you're not keen to check under your blanket either. The rule on ship seems to be, if it moves, ignore it. If it squeaks, befriend it. If it crunches, move your bedroll. Of course, sharing your living quarters with an army of rats and roaches comes with certain aromatic consequences. The mysterious smells that drift through the lower decks each night are nothing short of legendary. Some you recognise: wet straw, salt beef, and the pungent tang of unwashed humanity. Others are more mysterious, rising up from the shadows with a life of their own, hints of sour cabbage, forgotten laundry, and something that might once have been cheese, but has evolved into something far more philosophical. The guards blame the convicts blame the crew, everyone blames the rats, who remain suspiciously silent on the subject. At some point, the various stenches blend into a new shipboard perfume, equal parts nostalgia, warning, and survival instinct. You start to notice subtle variations. Oh, that's the Tuesday funk. Or, the beef stew must have gone for a swim. The rats don't seem to mind. If anything, the stronger the smell, the happier they look. You begin to realise that life on the Hulk is easier when you accept the small things you can't change, like the fact that there's a rat named Patch sleeping on your foot, or that your nightly lullaby is a combination of snoring, scratching, and the soft click of tiny claws on wood. Some of the convicts take comfort in befriending the vermin, slipping them the occasional crumb in exchange for a bit of warmth or distraction from the monotony. There's a kind of respect that develops, a silent pact of "don't bite me and I won't scream." By the time your voyage is halfway through, you're convinced you could write a treatise on rat etiquette. You've learned which corners to avoid at feeding time, and how to distinguish between a friendly visit and an impending midnight raid. You've also learned that when faced with a world that doesn't care much for your comfort, the company of a few determined rodents is sometimes the only thing that keeps your spirits afloat. And so, you drift off to sleep each night surrounded by your new friends, the uninvited, undemanding, and oddly loyal citizens of the convict ship. They never judge, they never argue, and in a world of hard men and harder times, they offer the one thing no one else can: acceptance, however squeaky it may be. Ancient naval tradition means first-timers crossing the line get a celebratory hazing. You're dunked, shaved, and painted with tar. Also, Neptune can be satisfied and the crew can laugh at you. You'd think surviving shipboard food, discipline, and the occasional rat invasion would be enough to earn you a bit of respect. But sailors have their own priorities. One of them is making sure that, when the ship crosses the equator, every greenhorn, anyone who's never crossed it before, receives a baptism by humiliation. It's an old tradition, equal parts superstition and group therapy. For you and the other unlucky landlubbers, it starts at dawn with a suspicious amount of giggling from the crew. Rumours circulate in the days leading up to the crossing. Toothless Dave swears you'll have to sing for Neptune's pleasure. Old Sally warns that the captain's wig is made from the hair of those who failed to pass the test. You try to laugh it off, but everyone who's been through it gets a faraway look in their eye, like war veterans, but with worse haircuts and more seaweed. When the day arrives, the ceremony unfolds like a carnival gone off the rails. The sailors dress up, Neptune himself in a mop wig and a bedsheet toga, his court of grinning deckhands in whatever costumes can be cobbled together from sacks and spare ropes. A judge with a fake beard reads out a list of imaginary crimes, failing to salute a dolphin, snoring off key, looking too pale for this latitude. You're summoned to the deck, surrounded by laughter, jeers, and the unmistakable whiff of impending doom. The baptism itself is a series of escalating indignities. First, you're drenched with buckets of seawater, each splash colder and saltier than the last. If you protest, you're told to thank Neptune for his mercy. Next comes the shaving. The ship's barber, a man whose hands shake either from age or boredom, goes at your stubble with a blunt razor, and if you're lucky, you keep most of your ear. Finally, the tar. A nice, sticky brush of it down the side of your face or across your chest, just enough to ensure you spend the next week stuck to your own shirt. For the crew, this is pure entertainment. For the convicts, it's a reminder that you're still at the bottom of the pecking order, now literally coated in tar and pride. Everyone's laughing, even the captain, who declares you officially children of Neptune, fit to cross into the southern hemisphere. There's a moment, after the worst of it is over, when you look around and see everyone grinning, some with relief, others with admiration. If you can laugh at yourself while dripping with salt water and sporting a patchy haircut, you'll probably survive anything this voyage throws at you. The day ends with extra rations, if you can call half a biscuit extra, and a rare sense of camaraderie. You share stories, compare scars, and learn which sailor has the best tar removal secrets. Spoiler, none of them work. For a while, you forget about the misery, the endless rocking of the ship, and even the rats. You're just a bunch of poor souls stuck on a floating prison, brought together by ritual, laughter, and Neptune's questionable sense of humour. And when the sun sets, you realise you've crossed a line not just on a map but in your own mind. You're a little less of a stranger, a little more a part of the bizarre floating community. Your skin stings, your hair's a disaster, and you reek of salt and tar, but you made it. If Neptune's satisfied, maybe for a moment so are you. You spend long nights staring at the ceiling, mentally drafting 37 different escape plans, each more ridiculous than the last. You get as far as what if I just swim back to England, before reality intervenes. The lights are low, the air thick with snoring and the occasional midnight scratch, and you're supposed to be sleeping. Instead, you're wide awake, listening to the creak of the ship's hull and the distant rhythmic slap of the ocean against wood. There's something about the monotony of the voyage, the endless grey sea, the familiar uncomfortable cot, the smell of despair that makes the mind wander to impossible places. And so, like every convict before you, you start plotting your great escape. You begin with the classics: overpower the guards, seize the captain, and sail for freedom. This plan lasts exactly as long as it takes for you to remember that the only weapons you possess are a splintery spoon and an attitude. Your bunkmates aren't much help either. Toothless Dave would get distracted by the promise of extra rations, and Weasel, while handy, is more interested in nicking crusts of bread than orchestrating a naval coup. Plan B: find a loose plank, slip overboard under the cover of darkness, and paddle to the nearest island. Simple, daring, entirely suicidal. For starters, you're hundreds of miles from land, the sharks are rumoured to be more sociable than the guards, and you can't swim further than the length of the ship before cramping up and needing a lie down. You briefly consider fashioning water wings from old rags, but abandon the idea when you remember you need those rags to keep warm. Next, you consider the hide-in-a-barrel approach. Surely someone could survive in a cask of salted beef until the next port. But every barrel on the ship is either full of something foul or guarded by sailors who have already seen every trick in the book. There's also the problem of old Sally, who has staked her claim to the largest cask and will defend it with her elbows and a vocabulary that could strip paint from the hull. After that comes the more creative plans: convincing the rats to stage a distraction, training the seagulls to deliver messages to sympathetic merchants, or tunnelling through the hull using nothing but sheer willpower and a broken button. At one point, you contemplate pretending to be ill, really ill, in the hopes you'll be moved closer to fresh air or left unguarded. But then you remember the surgeon, a man who believes in letting nature take its course, with the enthusiasm of someone who doesn't much care for nature or you. The others share your late-night fantasies. In hushed whispers, you swap stories of legendary escapes. The man who supposedly swam for 3 days and made it to Madagascar, he didn't. Or the woman who charmed her way off the ship disguised as a cabin boy, unlikely given her moustache. Every tale is more preposterous than the last, but that's half the fun. The guards, you suspect, secretly enjoy these stories too, if only because they know no one has ever actually succeeded. Even in your more lucid moments, you know escape is all but impossible. The ship is a fortress, the sea an endless moat, and every plank groans under the weight of 100 failed plans. But the dreaming serves a purpose. It keeps you sharp, keeps hope alive, and gives you something to focus on other than the monotonous slog of daily existence. Besides, even if you never break free, there's a strange comfort in plotting. For a few moments each night, you're not just a number in the hold. You're the star of your own story, a story where you outwit the system, outpace the sharks, and return home a legend. Eventually you drift off, your escape plans dissolving into dreams. Tomorrow you'll wake up to the same ship, the same guards, and the same miserable breakfast. But tonight, in your mind, you're free. At least until Toothless Dave starts snoring again. After months of sea and suffering, land appears. The crew cheers, the prisoners weep, and everyone squints at the shore, wondering if the spiders really are as big as hats. At first, you're not sure it's real. Is that a mirage, another cruel trick of the sun, or the product of one too many nights spent swapping feverish escape plans with Old Sally and Toothless Dave? But no, the shouts from above deck are different this time, a rough excitement in every voice. You elbow your way past a forest of armpits and get your first glimpse through a grimy porthole. There it is, a dark green smudge against a sky that finally promises something besides endless blue and grey. The mood on board changes with the announcement. The guards, so recently bored and surly, are suddenly busy with orders, paperwork, and the important business of looking important. The sailors, sunburnt and salt-caked, grin and slap each other on the back. For them, it's the end of a job, the promise of pay and solid ground. For you and your fellow convicts, it's more complicated. You feel a strange flutter in your gut, part hope, part dread, part hardtack biscuit that refuses to digest. As the coastline grows sharper, details emerge, tall trees, rolling hills, the faintest outline of settlements. The air itself seems different, spiced with a tang of eucalyptus and possibility, or maybe just new varieties of pollen ready to make your nose itch for the next 7 years. Every convict on board crowds the railings, jostling for a look, even Weasel, who usually only cares about pockets, not scenery. Old Sally mutters something about God's own garden, while Big Tom tries to hide the fact that he's crying by suddenly becoming very interested in the horizon. Rumours run wild. Some say the place is crawling with snakes that eat goats whole. Others swear the water is full of sharks the size of rowboats. But it's the spiders everyone's really talking about. The sailor beside you, sporting a tattoo of dubious origin, claims he once saw a huntsman's spider wearing a tricorn hat and demanding a toll at the city gate. You laugh, but keep your eyes peeled all the same. A strange sense of anticipation builds. You tidy your hair, such as it is, brush crumbs from your shirt and try to look presentable for your new home, or at least less like you've spent the last 4 months in the company of rats. The guards line you up for inspection, barking reminders to stand tall and no funny business. There's a last-minute scramble as everyone tries to remember which pocket their good handkerchief is in, and Old Sally tries to barter her lucky potato for a spot near the front of the line. The anchor drops with a shudder that runs through the whole ship. Boats are lowered into the water. You're herded over the side and packed in row after row, clinging to your bundle of belongings and whatever scraps of dignity you have left. The water smells fresh and wild, nothing like the stale soup that sloshed in your bilge all those months. The sun is too bright, the birds too loud, and the horizon too full of unfamiliar shapes. As you draw closer, you catch sight of locals on the shore, some curious, some wary, all watching as a boatload of sunburned, bewildered new arrivals bumps up onto the sand. The feeling is overwhelming. You're terrified, exhausted, but also strangely alive. You survived the voyage, the storms, the hunger, and the smell. You made it. Australia, your new prison, your new beginning, your chance to find out just how big those spiders really are. The sailors cheer, the prisoners weep, and you, well, you do a little of both. Welcome to New South Wales, mate. Try not to step on anything that bites back. You're marched ashore, blinking in the blinding sun, and lined up for a medical inspection. The doctor checks you for disease by poking you with a stick and deciding whether you look contagious or just unlucky. The sand underfoot feels strange, hot, and almost luxurious after months of creaking wood and sour straw. You try not to show it, but there's a real temptation to drop to your knees and kiss the ground, until you remember what you've heard about Australian ants. Better to stay upright and get on with the business of becoming an official colonial inconvenience. The sun, meanwhile, is relentless. You'd almost forgotten what real sunlight looks like after so many weeks in the gloom below decks. Now it's everywhere, burning your neck, bouncing off the water, and making your eyes water until you're not sure if you're crying or just leaking. Even the guards squint and grumble, their uniforms somehow even less flattering in the harsh glare. You realise quickly, in Australia your first punishment is sunburn, and your second is the awkward realisation that everyone can see how badly your shirt fits. The queue for medical inspection stretches along the shoreline like the world's least inviting parade. The doctor, a tired-looking man with an expression best described as profoundly sceptical, stands at the end, armed with a notebook, a battered hat, and a long, slightly wobbly stick. His technique is simple and direct. He pokes, he prods, and occasionally he sniffs, presumably to distinguish scurvy from general despair. He makes notes in his ledger, mutters to himself, and when pressed asks you 3 essential questions. Name, crime, can you swing a pickaxe without fainting? It's a tense affair. The convict in front of you is told to open his mouth. The doctor leans in, grimaces, and waves him through with the dismissive next. Old Sally tries to chat her way to a better diagnosis, but the doctor has heard every story before. He gives her a quick once-over and scrawls likely survivor in the book. You step up, hoping for a clean bill of health and maybe a bit of mercy. The stick pokes your ribs, your arm, and just for good measure your ankle, which you'd forgotten was swollen until now. He looks at your face, makes a sound somewhere between a sigh and a snort and writes, "Watch this one." Sometimes the doctor points out obvious problems. You've got lice. You know, you look hungry. Everyone does. Try not to die in the first week. Excellent advice. But mostly, he's interested in whether you're likely to infect the others, drop dead while digging a ditch, or create extra paperwork. The less work you look, the better your chances of being assigned somewhere outside the hospital tent, which, judging by the groans coming from within, is more punishment than privilege. Behind you, the other new arrivals fidget in the sun. Some whisper prayers, others pick at their clothes, trying to look robust and indispensable. You catch a glimpse of Weasel, who's already negotiating with a guard for a better spot in the labour gang, and Toothless Dave, who attempts to charm the doctor with his best gummy grin. Neither tactic seems to work. Once you've been prodded, sniffed, and officially declared fit enough for now, you're handed over to another official who records your name, assigns you a number, and tells you what comes next. It's all brisk, efficient, and only a little humiliating. You're sorted into groups, given fresh water, and reminded again not to try anything clever. The guards watch you with a mix of suspicion and amusement, as if daring you to collapse just so they have something to write home about. By the end of the inspection, your sunburn is deepening, your dignity is at an all-time low, and your sense of reality is stretched thin. Welcome to Australia. The land is beautiful, the sky enormous, and you, well, you're just another number in the world's strangest census. You meet kangaroos, emus, and the world's most sarcastic cockatoo. None of them are impressed by your criminal record. The spiders are especially judgmental. After the ordeal of inspection, you expect to face a stern overseer, or perhaps a welcoming committee of equally miserable convicts. Instead, your first proper reception in Australia is by the local wildlife, who make it perfectly clear that you are neither the first nor the most interesting criminal to wash up on these shores. The kangaroos are the first to show up, tall, muscled, and entirely unbothered by your presence. One hops lazily past the work camp, pausing just long enough to lock eyes with you. There is no welcome in that gaze, just a kind of gentle, enduring disdain. You sense immediately that, in the grand colonial pecking order, kangaroos outrank you. A few of the older convicts whisper tales of boxing matches with roos, but from the look on this one's face you'd be lucky to survive a game of cards, let alone fisticuffs. Then there are the emus, towering feathered nightmares with legs like fence posts and an attitude to match. They wander the edges of camp in loose, suspicious flocks, peering at the new arrivals with their beady, prehistoric eyes. You once thought geese in London were menacing, but these birds would give a lion second thoughts. One pecks at a dropped crust of hardtack, regards it with contempt, and saunters away, leaving your pride in shreds and your appetite unsettled. The cockatoos arrive in gangs, screeching and laughing from the gum trees above the camp. They are loud, raucous, and, you soon realise, deeply sarcastic. Every failed attempt at building a shelter, every dropped bucket, every shouted order from a red-faced sergeant is met with a chorus of mocking caws. If you had even a scrap of dignity left, the cockatoos would find it and pick it clean. You try to shoo one away, and it just tilts its head, squawks something that sounds suspiciously like "try harder," and resumes its commentary on your tragic work ethic. And then, of course, there are the spiders. The first time you see one, it's perched quietly in the corner of your assigned hut, legs splayed like it owns the place. It's easily the size of your hand, and it does not blink. You do, several times, as your brain tries to comprehend what new colonial horror has crawled into your life. Old Sally gives you a knowing smile. You get used to them, or you don't. The spiders watch you with unblinking ancient eyes, radiating the sort of judgment you thought only your grandmother could muster. You move your bedding anyway. It doesn't move. You apologize just in case. It isn't just the big things either. Every patch of grass seems to house an ant nest with aspirations of empire. Lizards dart through the undergrowth, staring you down before vanishing with a flick of their tails. At night, possums scamper across the roof, staging what can only be described as interpretive dance battles overhead. Even the flies are relentless, descending in swarms that make the worst London summer feel like a spa day. For all their indifference, there's something oddly comforting about the wildlife. They're survivors too, masters of adaptation, in a land where the rules are made up and the points don't matter. After a few days, you realise they are the true wardens of Australia, enforcing a pecking order you'll never fully understand. No matter what you did back home, out here, your criminal record means nothing. The kangaroos ignore you, the emus look through you, the cockatoos mock you, and the spiders judge you from above. You may be starting your sentence, but the local wildlife is serving life with style. Welcome to Australia, where the locals have more attitude than the guards, and you are always the butt of the joke. Congratulations! It's time to draw lots. Chain gang, road builder, or sheep wrangler. The good news, you've never seen a sheep up close. The bad news, you're about to. Assignment day dawns bright and hot, as if the sun itself is determined to add a final dash of misery to the proceedings. The guards assemble you in a ragged line, clipboards in hand and grins that say, "We've been waiting all week for this." Rumour has it someone once got assigned assistant baker, but most of the convicts agree that's just a legend made up to keep spirits up and hopes alive. You stand shoulder to shoulder with your shipmates, sweat already trickling down your back, trying not to look directly at the sergeant for fear he'll mistake you for someone who volunteered. The system is simple, if not entirely fair. Names are called, a job is announced, and you're shuffled to the left or right, depending on your fate. First up, chain gang. This is the classic, the assignment everyone dreads, smashing rocks, swinging pickaxes, and shuffling down the road in irons that clank with every reluctant step. The chain gang is where hope goes to get sunburned and blisters learn to multiply. It's back-breaking labour under a sky so wide it could swallow you whole, with a rhythm set by the overseer's whistle and the never-ending clink of metal. Next are the road builders. In theory it sounds less brutal. Just move dirt from here to there and try not to pass out. In reality, it's an endless campaign against dust, flies, and the creative geometry of colonial infrastructure. You learn that road is a generous term for any stretch of ground, not currently occupied by boulders, tree roots, or the occasional angry emu. The tools are heavy, the supervisor's heavier, and the work is so monotonous that you begin naming the rocks you can't budge. By week's end, you're convinced every convict in Australia has left their teeth, sweat, or dignity somewhere along the Governor's Road. Then there's sheep wrangler. You laugh until you realise it's not a joke. You've never seen a sheep up close. The only wool you've ever dealt with was attached to a moth-eaten scarf your aunt knitted from questionable leftovers. Now, you're handed a stick, pointed toward a rolling paddock, and told to keep them moving. The sheep, for their part, are unimpressed by your credentials. They are fluffy, stubborn, and possess a group intelligence best described as mob rule. No one warns you that sheep can run surprisingly fast, or that their gaze can be as judgmental as the captain's on inspection day. Within an hour you've lost half the flock, stepped in something unspeakable, and earned a new respect for shepherds, and possibly a lifelong fear of wool. The process is brisk, impersonal, and just chaotic enough to feel like a poorly organised lottery. You have about 10 seconds to accept your fate before you're handed a tool, a chain, or, in one unlucky soul's case, a goat with a limp. Toothless Dave gets assigned to the chain gang, where his lack of teeth is at least no disadvantage. Old Sally somehow ends up with the bakery. Maybe the legend was true after all. And Weasel manages to wriggle his way into messenger duty, which basically means running errands and picking pockets with official permission. As the sun climbs higher, you start your first shift. Every muscle protests. Every task seems designed to make you question your life choices. The guards keep a close watch, quick to correct slacking or attempted escape with a barked order or a not-so-gentle prod. The only relief comes at dusk when the air cools and the animals, sheep included, finally settle down. By nightfall, you're exhausted, sunburned and aching in places you didn't know existed. You collapse on your straw mat, dreaming of rocks, roads and sheep that chase you through endless fields. Assignment day is over. Tomorrow, it all starts again. Welcome to the working life of colonial Australia, your new normal, at least for the next 7 years. If you ever complained about your office job, you now dream of it wistfully. Here, break time means standing in the shade for exactly 3 seconds before the overseer shouts at you. Work begins before the sun is up, because apparently the only thing worse than a day in the blazing Australian sun is being late to it. You wake to the sound of a whistle, sharp, demanding, and far too enthusiastic for such a miserable hour. Breakfast is little more than a gulp of lukewarm water and a hunk of bread, eaten on the march as you shuffle to the day's assignment. Your muscles ache from yesterday. Your blisters have blisters. You're so tired you could sleep standing up, and some days you almost do. Once the sun rises, it comes with a vengeance. The sky is a blinding sheet of blue, the sort of colour you once associated with picnics and cheerful days in the park. Now it's a warning sign. You squint against the light and curse the lack of clouds, or, for that matter, any hint of shade. There are trees, but they're always just out of reach, as if they know what's coming and want no part of it. The work is relentless and designed with one goal in mind: break you down and build the colony up. If you're lucky, you're swinging a pickaxe at stubborn rocks. If you're unlucky, you're shoveling endless piles of dirt, mud, or something the guards only call fill. Some of the crew are digging ditches, others are laying roads, dragging logs, or stacking stones. The tasks change, but the rhythm never does. Work, sweat, curse, repeat. Your hands, once soft or at least not actively bleeding, become a map of calluses and cuts. Blisters form, burst and reform in a cycle that matches the days. The backs of your arms burn red, then brown, then just numb. You try to pace yourself, but the overseer is always there, looming, watching, shouting orders that never seem to make the work any easier or the sun any cooler. If you so much as slow down, he's on you with a voice like thunder and a stick to match. Lunch is a joke, hard bread, maybe a scrap of meat, and a few minutes sitting on a rock. The only entertainment is watching everyone else try to find a comfortable position. Toothless Dave offers a song, but no one has the energy to stop him. You glance at the distant horizon, half hoping to spot a rescue ship, half resigned to the fact that rescue in this place is just a myth. As the hours drag on, spirits begin to fray. Conversation, once lively, dwindles to grunts and monosyllables. You learn to communicate with just a glance, usually the universal, "Can you believe this?" Or I might actually collapse. The sun beats down, relentless, and sweat stings your eyes. Every now and then someone does collapse, and the work halts just long enough to drag them to the side before resuming at exactly the same miserable pace. By mid-afternoon, the heat is at its worst. The flies descend in swarms, biting any patch of exposed skin. You slap at them, at first in annoyance, then just for the rhythm, a little percussion to accompany the slow symphony of suffering. The ground shimmers, the tools grow heavy, and you begin to wonder if you'll ever stop smelling like dust and desperation. When the day finally ends, there's no cheering, only a slow, shuffling march back to camp. You count your blisters and try to remember what your old life was like. The office, the markets, even the boredom. It all feels impossibly distant now, a different world for a different person. Here, you measure time in calluses and the rare, precious seconds of shade. You sleep hard, if you sleep at all, and wake before dawn to do it all again. Convict labour. Not quite what you had in mind when you pictured a new life down under. Your new bed is a wooden plank. Your pillow is hope. The snoring is relentless. You develop the unique skill of napping with one eye open and a boot on your chest. you enter the barracks for the first time expecting, well, not comfort, but at least a horizontal surface that vaguely resembles a bed. What greets you instead is a long row of planks bolted together in an arrangement that's less restful slumber and more medieval group punishment. If you're lucky, your allotted plank comes with a little less splinter than average, and maybe even a view of the window, assuming you don't mind that the window is a narrow slit designed mainly for letting in the cold and the complaints. You quickly learn there's an etiquette to barracks life. Don't take up too much space, don't hog the blanket, if you're issued one, and never ever move someone else's boots. The penalty for that is immediate and memorable, a swift kick, or worse, being forced to sleep next to old Sally, whose nighttime rituals include enthusiastic singing and the world's most aggressive toenail clipping. Privacy is a distant memory. Everything you do, sleep, wake, eat, scratch and mutter curses at the ceiling, happens in full view of at least 24 other equally exhausted souls. You get used to the rhythm of barracks life, the low grumble of snorers, the high-pitched whistle of someone with a perpetual cold, the rustle of straw, and the symphony of bodies shifting, rolling, and sometimes falling off their planks with a thud that startles everyone into temporary silence. The plank itself is your constant companion. It's too narrow to roll over comfortably and just wide enough to encourage wishful thinking. Your back protests nightly, and your hips develop calluses. Toothless Dave claims he once woke up fused to the wood. You're not sure whether to laugh or check for yourself. Some enterprising souls try to pad their plank with spare clothing, but within a week the clothes take on the same odour as the barracks, a rich blend of sweat, unwashed wool, and whatever the last rainstorm dragged in. Then there's the matter of your pillow, which is less pillow and more an idea you had once. Sometimes you bunch up your coat, sometimes you use your own arm, and sometimes, when nothing else will do, you lay your head on hope itself and pray for a few solid hours before the next round of labour. On bad nights, your only solace is that everyone else is just as uncomfortable as you. Sleep is a communal affair, and light. You train yourself to doze in short bursts, eyes half open, always alert for the sound of boots clomping or the unmistakable approach of a guard. You sleep with your hand on your bundle of belongings, and one foot planted firmly atop your shoes. The barracks are notorious for early morning disappearances, blankets, socks, even the odd crust of bread. Weasel, ever the opportunist, can nap in any position and still wake up with someone else's hat. When morning comes, you wake up sore and stiff, unsure whether you've rested or simply spent several hours trying not to fall off your plank. The sun filters in through the cracks, the barracks slowly come alive with groans and curses, and you realise you've survived another night. It's not glamorous, it's not restful, but it is, in its own strange way, a shared victory. Some nights, as the moon shines through the slit in the wall and the snoring orchestra reaches a crescendo, you almost find it funny. In a world turned upside down, you've learned to sleep upright, sideways, and sometimes not at all. You close your eyes, listen to the symphony, and dream of beds, soft, warm, impossibly far away. For now you settle for your plank, your hope, and the comfort of knowing you're not alone in your misery. Misbehave, and you're introduced to the creative side of colonial justice, standing in stocks while flies circle, or a stint in a dark box where your thoughts are your only company and you owe them money. From the moment you step off the ship, it's clear that colonial Australia has never met a punishment it didn't want to try at least once. The old classics are still in rotation, of course. Take the stocks, 2 wooden boards, some iron rings, and the chance to stand on public display with your feet and hands firmly locked in place. It's a simple design, and yet when you're standing in the blazing sun with flies as your only audience, you find yourself appreciating the ingenuity of simple cruelty. Passers-by point, laugh, and occasionally offer you the rarest currency in New South Wales, unsolicited advice. You learn quickly that the flies are the true overseers here. They descend in waves, landing on your face, crawling up your nose and staging the sort of invasion that makes you long for the sweet anonymity of your old London cell. If you're unlucky, your time in the stocks coincides with a market day, when everyone, including that sarcastic cockatoo, drops by for a look. You're the day's entertainment, a cautionary tale in full sun, and no one lets you forget it. Even your fellow convicts, who should really know better, snicker from the shade. But the stocks are just the beginning. More serious offenders, or simply those unlucky enough to catch the overseer on a bad morning, are treated to the infamous flogging. The cat o' nine tails makes another appearance, wielded with the same enthusiasm it enjoyed at sea. Punishments are public spectacles. The colony gathers in a semicircle, guards, free settlers, convicts, and any wildlife with a sense of schadenfreude, to watch as lashes are administered. Each one lands with a crack that echoes off the gum trees. The recipient grits their teeth, bites their lip, and tries not to give anyone the satisfaction of a good scream. There's a nurse nearby, mostly to make sure you're fit enough to finish the full sentence. Occasionally the magistrates get creative. There's the chain gang on double rations, which really means double work, not double food. There's the extra shift with the road crew, or for the especially rebellious, the privilege of clearing rocks from Governor Macquarie's prized new lawn. The only thing more punishing than the labour is the realisation that you'll never make the lawn proud. Worst of all, though, is solitary. It sounds peaceful, but in practice it's a windowless box the size of a bad idea, tucked away in a corner of the compound. Inside, it's pitch dark and just wide enough to pace in circles, which is exactly what you do when you're not trying to keep the rats company. The punishment is twofold. First, you're alone with your thoughts, which, let's be honest, isn't a place anyone wants to be after weeks of convict life. Second, you owe the colony for your board and lodging, because even in punishment, colonial justice has a business model. Some say a man left alone too long in solitary comes out talking to the ants. Most just come out quiet, hungry and eager to avoid a return visit. After a while, the threat of punishment hangs over every day. The guards wield it like a shadow, but you adapt. You learn the limits, when to speak, when to duck, when to stand very still and hope someone else catches the overseer's bad mood. Some days, you're convinced the punishments exist mainly to keep you all on your toes and the local flies in work. But through it all, you endure. You compare scars, swap stories, and remind each other that, as bad as the punishments are, you're still standing. And sometimes that's the only reward colonial justice has to offer. If you behave, and by behave I mean survive without collapsing, you might earn a ticket of leave. You get to walk around, but don't get cocky. One wrong look at the constable and it's back to the chain gang. The day someone in your gang gets their ticket of leave, the barracks goes strangely quiet. Not with the awe reserved for a genuine hero, but with the careful, suspicious silence that usually precedes a thunderstorm. You've all heard of the elusive ticket, the slip of paper that grants a convict the right to exist outside the direct glare of an overseer, at least for a few hours a day. It sounds like freedom, until you read the fine print, or watch what actually happens next. Getting a ticket is, in theory, a reward for good behaviour. Diligent work, no attempts at mutiny, only minor brawls in the mess line. In practice, it's a reward for managing to survive long enough without causing trouble, collapsing, or stealing anything so obvious that even the magistrate notices. The ceremony is less keys to the city and more don't embarrass us. The superintendent calls your name, squints at you, and hands you the crumpled, half-legible paper. Ticket of leave. Try not to lose it, or yourself. The rules start immediately. You're allowed to work for wages, pick up supplies, and technically move around the colony, but freedom is a stretch. Every constable in town knows your face and your business. There are curfews, check-ins, surprise inspections, and a long list of places you're not allowed to go, which always seem to include anywhere you actually want to visit. You can't leave town without written permission, you can't drink in public, and heaven help you if you're caught near the docks. Toothless Dave calls it freedom on a leash. Old Sally says the leash is mostly there to keep you from running straight into another 7 years. Your fellow convicts treat you differently too. Some look at you with a mix of envy and suspicion. Has he turned informant? Others ask for favours, assuming your status comes with perks, like a second helping of gruel or first pick of the softest straw. In reality, the perks are few and fleeting. A chance to earn your own bread, a bed with slightly fewer splinters, and the luxury of walking to work without someone shouting at you, unless you're late, which you usually are. Of course, there's always the fear you'll lose it all in an instant. The constables are everywhere, watching for the smallest slip. Say the wrong thing to a free settler, that's a report. Linger too long outside the market, that's loitering with intent. Make a joke about the governor's hat, and you'll find yourself picking up rocks for the chain gang before the punchline lands. The ticket is a privilege, and everyone reminds you often and loudly just how easily it can be revoked. Even with all the rules, the ticket changes things. The first time you walk the streets at dusk, untethered, The sky seems wider. You might earn a few coins, enough to buy a crust of bread or, if you're feeling reckless, a new handkerchief. There's a taste of hope in the air, thin, fragile but real. Some manage to save up, buy their way out, or even send a letter home saying, "I'm making it." Most simply try not to stand out, blend in, and keep breathing. You start to notice the small mercies. A shopkeeper who greets you by name, the chance to watch the sea without counting minutes. The possibility, distant but present, that you might someday really be free. Until then, you keep your ticket dry, your head down, and your shoes by the door. Because in colonial Australia, almost freedom is still freedom, and the trick is to keep it for as long as you possibly can. One eye on the clock, one on the constable, and both feet pointed away from the chain gang. Welcome to the big time, mate. Just don't get used to it. Somehow, after all this, you find yourself planting crops, making friends, or maybe even starting a family. It's not quite the dream, but it's not the prison hulk either. You learn to laugh, if only to keep from crying. The first thing you notice about freedom is that it's a lot like work. After months or years of hard labour and watching the sun crawl across the sky from behind a wall of misery, you wake up one morning not as a prisoner, but as something like a settler. There's still mud under your fingernails, a sunburn that never quite fades, and a reflexive shudder every time you hear someone shout "line up." But now, for the first time, you get to choose what you do with your hands. For most, it starts with a patch of land. Maybe you're handed a strip of dirt and told to make it grow, or maybe you scrounge a few seeds from a sympathetic overseer and try your luck with potatoes. At first, nothing cooperates. The soil is stubborn, the sun is relentless, and the local wildlife treats your tiny crop like an all-you-can-eat buffet. You plant, you hope, and you watch as a kangaroo hops straight through your best row of beans without so much as an apology. Still, something takes root, if not in the earth, then in you. Each green shoot that survives feels like a tiny act of rebellion, a promise that, despite everything, you might actually make this place your own. Social life in the new colony is a patchwork, stitched together from fellow survivors. You band together for meals, swap stories over weak tea, and grumble collectively about the weather, the food, and the ever-present threat of being called back to the chain gang. Toothless Dave becomes an unlikely neighbour, turning out to be a fair hand with a shovel and a fountain of gossip. Old Sally offers advice on everything from gardening, don't bother with turnips, they'll break your heart, to courting, pick someone with strong arms and low expectations. Even Weasel manages to go semi-legit, running errands and collecting rumours instead of pockets. You find yourself making peace with the strangeness of it all. The sky is enormous, the stars brighter than any city night, and sometimes, when the work is done and the fire's crackling, you almost forget the endless journey and the years behind bars. The hardships don't vanish, but they lose their sharpest edges. You learn to laugh at the stubborn sheep, at your own muddy hands, at the fact that you once missed London's fog. There's comfort in shared jokes, even ones about the food, which is still terrible, but at least you cooked it yourself. For some, the new life means more than just survival. There are families formed, strange, stitched-together clans of ex-convicts, free settlers, and the occasional bemused emu wandering through the backyard. You find out you're stronger than you thought, and that forgiveness, from others and yourself, is a slow-growing crop but worth the wait. Some even write letters home, telling impossible tales of fresh starts and second chances. The land is harsh, the rules are harsher, but you keep going. You build a hut, then a fence, then a tiny hope that tomorrow will be a bit easier. Sometimes it isn't, but sometimes it is. Over time you realise you're not just surviving, you're living. You're planting, building, laughing, and against all odds, finding moments of happiness in a place that once felt like exile. It's not what you dreamed, but it's yours. And when you look back at the prison hulk, at the endless sea and the misery you endured, you see just how far you've come. Life in Australia is madness, but it's your madness now. And for the first time in years, you wouldn't trade it for anything. Even a warm, dry bunk back in London. You don't realise how good you had it with take 2 aspirin and call me in the morning until the ship's surgeon offers you a rusty saw and a shot of rum. If you're lucky, his most advanced technique is ignoring you until the problem goes away on its own. Infection? That's just flavour for the next patient. The medical care on a convict ship or in the new colony is less science and more improvised disaster response. The first thing you learn is that the surgeon is not a doctor in any modern sense. He's probably been pressed into service after a brief apprenticeship in barbering, or maybe just because he can stomach the sight of blood without fainting. You meet him for the first time when you stub your toe and, within minutes, are being eyed as if you've brought a rare and exciting specimen for his collection. The surgery itself is a cramped corner of the lower deck, separated from the chaos by a ragged sheet. The shelves are lined with mysterious jars, questionable powders, and the sort of instruments you'd expect to find in an especially creative torture chamber. There's always a bowl of something soaking in spirits, ostensibly to sterilize, but also handy for numbing the senses before anything sharp comes out. The surgeon's hands are steady, his eyes bloodshot, and his sense of humour, unfortunately, alive and well. For most ailments, the cure is rum, lots of it. Sore throat? Rum. Toothache? Rum. Infected splinter? Rum, and, if you're feeling particularly unlucky, a hot knife. If your complaint is serious enough, you may be invited to lie down on the operating table, which is really just a crate with a suspicious stain, and bite down on a strip of leather. The first rule of the surgeon's table: don't look at the tools. The second rule: don't ask what happened to the last patient. Amputation, you quickly discover, is always an option. Got a bad cut? The surgeon eyes your arm with a gleam that makes you tuck it behind your back. Rumours abound about men who went in for a headache and came out a little shorter than they went in. You joke with the others, but you all know the truth. Sometimes it's safer to let a wound heal itself than risk a surgical consultation. Minor ailments are treated with a bewildering assortment of remedies. There's calomel for everything from constipation to confusion. It works by making you forget your original problem. Mustard plasters for chest complaints, and a healthy dose of leeches for any situation where bleeding is considered a solution. The leeches are the healthiest creatures on board. If the surgeon runs out, he simply encourages the local wildlife. There's a rumour that one man once had a spider applied to his boils as a colonial cure. If you're lucky enough to avoid the knife, you still have to contend with the surgeon's attitude. Most of his work consists of triage by personality. Whiners get a stern word and a slap on the back. Stoics get a bit of rum and a nod of respect. Actual emergencies get a look of real concern, usually because he suspects he'll have to fill out a report. He's equal parts cynic and optimist, convinced that most people's bodies are tougher than they think, and the rest can be explained away as natural causes. You learn quickly to rely on your fellow convicts for medical advice, home remedies, whispered superstitions, even a gentle hand when the fever runs high. Old Sally brews questionable teas. Toothless Dave swears by garlic. Weasel just keeps his head down and avoids the surgeon at all costs. At the end of the day, survival is a combination of luck, resilience, and knowing when to hide a suspicious cough. The surgeon's table is a last resort, a place where hope and horror mix freely, and where the best prescription is, as always, to stay out of sight and never ever trust anyone with a rusty saw and a smile. Now and then, they let you scratch out a letter to Mum back in England. The ink is thin, the paper thinner, and you spend most of your time debating how much to sugarcoat the part about eating salted horse meat. Wish You Were Here takes on a very different tone when you're writing from the bottom of the world. It's said that a letter home is a lifeline, a fragile string connecting you to a past life of muddy streets, familiar faces, and bread that doesn't bite back. The reality, of course, is a little more complicated. Paper is a rare luxury in the colony, and the precious sheets handed out by the guards are so thin you're afraid your memories might bleed straight through to the other side. The ink, made from a mixture of soot, water, and something that smells suspiciously like boiled boot, fades as quickly as your optimism. Still, you take up the stub of a pencil or a battered quill and start, as everyone does, with Dearest Mother. Whether your mother is still waiting for you or has long since written you off as a lost cause, you're never sure. But you write anyway, if only because it feels like proof you're still alive. The first challenge is what to say. Do you mention the voyage? Crossing the sea was an adventure, which is true if you consider dysentery, rats, and a diet of mouldy biscuits an adventure. Do you describe your new home? The sun shines most days, it scorches. The locals are fascinating. The kangaroos glare, the spiders plot. The work is honest and unrelenting. It's tempting to paint it all as a grand opportunity, but then you remember your mother knows you too well to believe you've suddenly become a fan of agricultural labour and rustic living. Then there's the question of honesty. How much do you reveal about the reality of colonial life? You toy with confessions. We eat more salted horse than I thought possible. My bunkmate is a professional snorer, and I'm now on a first-name basis with a spider the size of my hand. Ultimately, you settle for understated resilience. Food is plain, but nourishing. I am adapting, and we are well supervised. Old Sally, penning her own letter, advises, never let them know you're desperate. They'll only worry. Or worse, they'll stop sending you socks. Sometimes you add a bit of colonial colour. Saw a kangaroo today, looked at me as if I owed it money. Or, weather is warmer than London, but so are the flies. It helps to laugh, even if the joke is mostly for yourself. You sign off with the same hopeful note each time. Give my love to everyone. Tell them I am making the best of things. Your loving son, still dreaming of home. The act of writing is its own form of therapy. For a brief moment, you're not just convict number 238, labouring under the Australian sun. You're a person with a history, a family, and a stubborn sense of humour. The letter may take months to reach its destination, if it ever does. There's no guarantee your family will reply or even receive it at all. But you tuck it into the outbox, watch the guard collect it, and allow yourself a moment of hope. Every so often, a letter arrives from England, a precious scrap of home. Sometimes it's news of a cousin's marriage, or an aunt's passing, or simply a line from mum. Keep your head up and your socks dry. It's enough. The paper is just as thin, the words just as faded, but it feels like a warm hug, a reminder that the world is still out there, waiting for you. In the end, writing home is about more than news. It's a small rebellion against despair, a proof that you exist, that you matter, and that somewhere someone might be thinking of you. Even if it's just to wonder whether you ever really learned to write at all. After enough weeks at sea, logic goes out the window and you start believing anything. There's talk of ghost ships, sea serpents, and islands made entirely of gold, usually whispered at midnight by a guy who's been eating mouldy biscuits for 3 weeks. Even the crew admits, the only thing scarier than a sea monster is running out of beer. Somewhere around week 5 of your forced maritime adventure, the border between reality and imagination blurs like ink in a rainstorm. The days run together, the food loses even the pretense of variety, and the endless blue horizon does something odd to your mind. Soon, the regular soundtrack of snoring, creaking wood, and sloshing water is joined by a new chorus, the whispered, breathless sharing of every wild tale anyone can remember. It starts small. A flash of strange light on the water is obviously the ghost of a drowned sailor, condemned to wander forever, seeking his lost biscuit. Toothless Dave, who claims to have seen it all, swears he once caught a glimpse of a phantom ship, trailing behind in the fog, its tattered sails flapping without a breeze, its deck haunted by the doomed souls of past convicts. Old Sally counters with her own legend about the midnight whaler, a vessel captained by a skeleton in a judge's wig, come to collect those who cheated the hangman's noose. The stories don't stop at the supernatural. Every odd splash, every shadowy movement just below the surface is evidence of something monstrous lurking in the deep. The crew, bored and just superstitious enough themselves, fan the flames. There's a warning not to stare too long at the waves in the moonlight, or you'll catch the eye of a sea serpent longer than the ship, with scales sharper than a sergeant's tongue. Weasel claims he saw it once, and that it blinked at him in perfect time with the ship's bell. You'd laugh if you weren't busy listening. The human mind, deprived of comfort and predictability, craves the extraordinary. By candlelight, even the most rational souls start to wonder if there really are islands made entirely of gold waiting just beyond the horizon. The oldest sailors scoff, but you catch them touching their lucky charms, muttering prayers, and looking a little too nervous when fog descends. Toothless Dave starts sleeping with one eye open, just in case the ghosts come looking for new recruits. The paranoia grows whenever supplies run low. One day, the rumour goes round that the water barrels are haunted. Another, someone swears that rats have begun speaking in code, planning an uprising. Each time a storm hits, it's attributed not to weather, but to Neptune's anger, usually provoked by a convict's unwise comment about the captain's navigation skills. You find yourself knocking on wood, spitting over your shoulder, and making secret pacts with the ship's cat. Logic at this point is as scarce as fresh vegetables. Even the officers have their rituals. The first mate refuses to whistle after sunset, convinced it attracts bad luck. The cook always throws the first spoonful of stew overboard for the spirits he claims, but you suspect it's just to get rid of the worst lumps. On particularly rough nights, everyone gathers below deck, swapping stories and tallying up all the ways the sea might try to claim you before breakfast. But in the end, the real monster is monotony. These stories are a lifeline, a way to pass the endless time, a reminder that the world, for all its horrors, is still big enough to surprise you. Besides, the only thing truly guaranteed to send shivers down your spine isn't a ghost ship or a kraken. It's the quartermaster's announcement that the beer ration is gone. That's when you know fear, and when even the boldest sailor might start seeing things in the dark. So you listen, you believe a little, and you pass the tales on. Because sometimes, the only thing scarier than the unknown is the idea that nothing unexpected will ever happen again. They say clothes make the man, but on a convict ship all they do is make you itch. Your uniform is one size, unflattering. It doubles as pyjamas, rain gear, and when things get rough, a communal handkerchief. By week 3 it's mostly held together by good intentions and bits of old rope. You remember vaguely the days when you owned more than one shirt and could tell your socks apart from your neighbours. Those days are gone. Your introduction to convict fashion begins the moment you're handed your standard issue uniform, a stiff, heavy tunic in an indeterminate colour, somewhere between muddy disappointment and regretful oatmeal. The trousers sag in all the wrong places, and the only thing remotely tailored is the way the sleeves seem to catch every loose nail and splinter. Dressing in the morning is a group activity. Privacy is a distant memory, and modesty is just a rumour spread by the lucky. You and your bunkmates perform a sort of choreographed struggle, wriggling into your uniforms while avoiding elbows and accidental eye contact. Toothless Dave swears he got the extra scratchy set. Old Sally claims her trousers used to belong to a man twice her size. No one's sure which is worse, wearing something too tight or something that threatens to fall off every time you sneeze. The first thing you notice is the itch. It starts as a mild annoyance and escalates to an all-day battle. The fabric, coarser than anything you've ever worn, seems designed to maximize discomfort and foster a thriving ecosystem of fleas and lice. Every seam is a potential hiding place for some new irritation, and after a while you scratch in rhythm with the creaking of the ship. You wonder if the uniform was engineered as a kind of behavioural experiment. How long can one person go before they start talking to their own collar? As the voyage drags on, your uniform becomes less outfit and more survival kit. When it rains, and it always rains, your tunic is the only thing between you and pneumonia. When the sun blazes down, it offers a thin, defiant shield, better than nothing, though not by much. At night, it's your blanket. During storms, your mop. In moments of crisis, your emergency napkin. Old Sally once used hers to smother a rat, an act that earned her a reputation for bravery and a permanent stain on her sleeve. By the 3rd week, your clothes tell a story, none of it flattering. Stains accumulate, salt from the sea, sweat from your labour, and mysterious blotches no one will admit to. The original colour is gone, replaced by an abstract pattern best described as patina of the hopeless. Buttons vanish, replaced by knots of twine and creative weaving. When a hole appears, you patch it with whatever you can find. A scrap of old sail, a piece of rope, or, in one case, a page from someone's unlucky letter home. If you're resourceful, or just desperate, you modify your uniform. Weasel cuts the sleeves off his tunic for better airflow, promptly getting a sunburn and a reprimand. Toothless Dave turns his trousers into shorts, inspiring envy until a cold snap has everyone swapping insults and spare rags. You dream of clean linen, or at least a shirt that doesn't double as a small rodent's holiday home. The guards, for their part, are no better dressed. Their uniforms are faded, patched, and just as susceptible to the relentless itch. If anything, it's the great equalizer. Everyone on the ship is just a few days away from turning their last pair of socks into gloves. Dignity is not included in the dress code. By the end of the voyage, you no longer care how you look. You're grateful for anything that covers your skin, keeps out the chill and doesn't bite. And when you finally set foot on land in your tattered, improvised ensemble, you do so with the confidence of someone who knows that fashion, much like hope, is whatever you can hold together for one more day. Surviving among your fellow prisoners is a crash course in social navigation. You learn quickly which guard likes an extra spoonful of porridge, which inmate can get you an extra blanket, and why you should never, ever sit in Big Bill's favourite spot. The barter economy thrives, and so does the fine art of minding your own business. The official rules of convict life are written in some dusty ledger, but the real rules, those you pick up fast or you don't last long. The moment you arrive, it's clear. Authority here isn't about uniforms or rank, but about who controls the biscuits, the gossip, and the only dry spot under the leaky eaves. You start with the basics. Toothless Dave, always happy to mentor a newcomer, leans in and whispers the first commandment. If you want an easy life, keep the guards happy and the loudmouths guessing. Bribery isn't just tolerated, it's practically encouraged. Got a bit of tobacco, a wedge of cheese, or the promise of an extra pair of socks from home? Suddenly a guard forgets your name when the work detail is assigned, or you find yourself standing at the front of the bread line. You quickly develop a sixth sense for which guards respond to flattery, which prefer food and which can't be bought at any price. Those are the ones to avoid, obviously. Within days, you're swept into the swirling world of convict barter. Nothing is what it seems. A crust of bread is currency. A spoon with a smooth handle is as good as gold. Weasel, the undisputed king of trade, will swap you a blanket for a favour, and a favour for half your supper, always at a rate that somehow benefits him most. You watch in awe as he transforms a lost button into a seat by the fire, and then, a day later, into a nearly new handkerchief. In this world, a scrap of news from the outside can buy you protection, and a bit of sugar can buy you a loyal friend, at least until the sugar runs out. But it's not all cosy trades and whispered deals. There's an edge to everything. Big Bill, a giant with a temper to match, has carved out a patch of floor that is strictly off limits. Sit there, and you'll find yourself making a fast acquaintance with the sharp end of something unpleasant. Toothless Dave once told a new arrival, "You can have my plank or my teeth, but not both." The newcomer, not understanding the joke, is still looking for a comfortable place to sleep. You learn the art of watching without staring, listening without being caught, and speaking only when the cost of silence is too high. Rumours are traded as eagerly as rations. One whisper can make you a hero or an outcast overnight. Old Sally's a master of this game, spinning tales that leave everyone uncertain whether she's an ally or just dangerously bored. Most stick to the safest strategy. Be useful, be polite, and never owe anyone too much. There are other unspoken rules. Don't complain about the food too loudly. Someone might take it personally and season it with something memorable. If someone offers you a seat, check for pranks before you sit. Never discuss escape plans with more than 2 people at a time. The third will almost certainly be a snitch. Most important of all, always know where your blanket is and never turn your back on the porridge line. Gradually you find your place. Maybe you're a trader, a joker, a silent observer. Maybe you're just good at blending in, staying off the radar and surviving. It's less about making friends than about making it to tomorrow with all your teeth and a full belly. By the time you've mastered the art of barter and bribery, you realize you've become something else entirely, a survivor of the social jungle, fluent in the language of caution, and if you're very, very lucky, still in possession of your blanket. In this strange new world, that's about as good as it gets. So, tonight as you settle into your clean bed, no hardtack biscuits for a pillow, no rats staging a coup in your laundry. Maybe whisper a quiet thank you to your ancestors who survived the world's worst group cruise. Because if there's one thing history proves, it's that people are endlessly stubborn, resourceful, and often just unlucky enough to wind up on the wrong side of a 19th century courtroom. You've made it through the heat, the hunger, the hard labour, and a level of personal hygiene that would frighten a 12-year-old. You've faced down spiders the size of dinner plates, rules that change daily, and food that bites back. And yet, even with all the suffering somewhere between punishment and survival, people found absurd moments of laughter and a strange sense of belonging in a world that didn't care if they did. So tonight, as you stretch out, safe from the lash, the heat, and the sound of snoring convicts, be grateful for indoor plumbing, soft sheets, and a justice system that, for all its flaws, doesn't sentence you to build roads with your bare hands for stealing socks. History is a parade of impossible odds and questionable decisions, but it's also a story of survival, hope, and the slightly ridiculous things people will do just to keep going. Close your eyes, let your mind drift back to the quiet waves, and remember, you live in a world where your greatest punishment is an alarm clock, and your wildest voyage is probably a cruise with too many shrimp cocktails. Rest well. You've earned it.